Welcome to the explainer. So, how does a company, one that literally helps feed a nation and power its homes, just decide to completely reinvent itself? That's what we're digging into today. We're looking at Engro, a Pakistani corporate giant, and its huge strategic pivot. And trust me, this story tells us a ton about the future of the country's economy. Okay, so before we dive into Engro itself, you got to understand the stage on which this whole drama unfolds. I'm talking about the economic climate. You see, every big corporate move happens for a reason, right? And the backdrop here, well, it's absolutely key to understanding the entire story. So, what was going on in Pakistan's economy around 2025? Well, the picture was complex. It was this mix of, a steady recovery on one hand, and then some truly incredible, almost wild energy in the market on the other. And this is where it gets really interesting. Look, on one hand, you've got this steady, pretty modest GDP growth. It's growing, but not setting the world on fire. But then you look at the stock market. The KSE 100 index just exploded, gaining over 100% in a single year. That disconnect, that gap between a kind of stabilizing economy and a red-hot market, well, that creates the perfect storm, the perfect environment for a company like Engro to make a really bold move. And it's right in the middle of this environment that our main character, Engro Holdings, steps onto the stage. So who exactly are they? Let's meet the company. So Engro is what you'd call a massive conglomerate. Think of it as a collection of companies that are just deeply woven into the very fabric of Pakistan's economy. It's a household name for sure, but its reach is probably way broader than most people even realize. And this really gives you a sense of their incredible reach. I mean, we're talking about everything from the fertilizers that help grow the nation's food to the terminals that import its energy, and even the cell towers that connect its people. Engro is fundamental, and that deep integration means that when a company like Engro decides to change direction, believe me, the entire economy feels the ripples. In 2025, that was the year of the big change. Engro didn't just, tweak its strategy a little bit. No, they went all in. They completely reorganized their fundamental structure. They made three huge, deliberate moves. Okay, step one, they consolidated their ownership. We'll get into what that means in a second. Step two, they reversed a decision to sell off their thermal energy assets. Basically, they brought them back home. And step three, they made a massive acquisition, buying a company that added thousands of telecom tower sites. Each of these steps was a critical piece of a much larger puzzle. Okay, let's zoom in on that first step because, honestly, it's the core of this entire restructuring. Before all this, the holding company had what's called a minority stake, just under 40% in its main operating arm. And afterwards, 100%, full control. That leap from being a partial owner with some influence to being in absolute control, that is the key to everything that happens next. All right, so how did this massive reshuffle actually affect the bottom line? I mean, that's the big question, right? Well, when the financial results for 2025 came out, the headline numbers, they looked almost too good to be true. So get this, the headline number was a profit of 42 billion rupees, and that's in just 9 months. Now, to put that into perspective for you, it was only 6.4 billion the year before. That is a massive, almost unbelievable jump in profitability. So, the obvious question is, how? I mean, a company doesn't just increase its profit by nearly 700% overnight just by selling more stuff. Something else has to be going on. And the real answer, well, it's kind of buried in the accounting. And here it is. This is the big reveal. So, while their core businesses did really well, earning a solid 15.2 billion in profit, the vast majority of that huge headline number, a staggering 26.8 billion, wasn't from selling more fertilizer or energy. Nope. It was a one-time paper gain. Basically, when they brought those thermal energy assets back onto their books, the value was reassessed, and that created this huge one-off profit on paper. It's a direct result of the reshuffle, not recurring income. Super important to understand that distinction. Okay, so let's look past that one-time accounting gain for a second and see how the actual day-to-day businesses were doing. Let's start with the one that's so fundamental to Pakistan's food supply. So, Engro fertilizers played this absolutely vital national role. They made sure farmers could get urea at a pretty significant discount compared to global prices, which is huge for food security. But this came at a cost to their own bottom line. Their profitability was actually down, mostly because of weaker demand from farmers who were struggling a bit themselves.
All right, now let's turn to the business that really represents Engro's big bet on the future, building the backbone of Pakistan's digital economy.
And this part of the story is all about incredible growth. By buying Deodar and expanding their own operations, Engro's connectivity business shot up to over 15,000 tower sites. I mean, think about that. This single move transformed them into one of the top 20 independent tower companies in the entire world. It really positions them as a critical player and helping to bridge Pakistan's digital divide. So, with this massive restructuring now complete and a clear new focus on things like connectivity, what does the future actually look like for this corporate giant? Where do they go from here? Well, in the company's own words, they're feeling pretty confident. They see themselves as resilient and perfectly positioned to ride the wave of Pakistan's improving economy. The whole point of the restructuring was to make them stronger and more agile for whatever comes next. And their vision for the future isn't just about the balance sheet. They're also signaling that long-term responsible growth is the goal. They're focusing on the whole shebang, everything from employee well-being and environmental impact to ethics and community development. Which, of course, leaves us with one final question. Engro has drawn up a bold new blueprint. There's no doubt about that. They've simplified their structure, they've clarified who's in control, and they've placed this massive bet on Pakistan's digital future. So the architecture is in place, but the real test, the test of execution, of turning that blueprint into lasting, sustainable growth, well, that's just beginning.